remembering the importance of human oversight of AI systems. However, what makes their recommendation exceptionally applicable are its extensive policy area actions, which allow policymakers to translate the core values and principles into action with respect to data governance, environmental and ecosystems, gender, education and research, and health and social well-being, among many other spheres, which is why I'm particularly excited to be among our extraordinary panelists today. They represent a variety of disciplines and service populations from around the world who represent a variety of age groups, economics, cultures, etc. Our panelists represent tech experts, physicians, policy analysts, and a minister, collectively working again with policies and populations that are impacted by AI. Our panelists include Dr. Rashmi Banga, Dr. Sulagna Ghosh, whom we refer to as Dia, Reverend Chris Hope, and Dr. Anatole Manzi. Rashmi in particular serves as chief of the Development Research Branch in the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the department responsible for the World Social Report and frontier technology issues. Her research centers on the socio-economic implications of technological change, climate dynamics, and evolving geopolitical trends. Dia is an interdisciplinary scientist and founder of Joint Family, a fiscally sponsored social venture bringing generations together to learn, deliberate, and act on the societal impacts of emerging technologies. Through Joint Family, Dia leads inclusive, multi-generational programs that explore the real-world risks and opportunities of generative AI, from misinformation and algorithmic bias to workforce shifts and how we care or connect with our loved ones. Reverend Chris Hope is president of the Hope Group and youth director of Hope for Africa, and he works with communities and public leaders worldwide to guide the ethical use of AI in ways that uphold human dignity and advance equity. Last but not least is our dear colleague, Dr. Anatole Manzi. Dr. Manzi is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer at Partners in Health, founder of Move Up Global, and lecturer in medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School here in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. With that, I want to turn over and hear from you briefly in our poll that we're going to launch. So you'll see in the Mentimeter a QR code, and hopefully you'll be able to join and click on that join button and answer what one word comes to mind when you think of AI. Resourcefulness, job, humanity, convenience, exciting, co-pilot, sci-fi. That's a new one. I haven't, we've done this a few times and I hadn't seen sci-fi come up before. Insightful, curious, progress juxtaposed with fear. We have a variety of perspectives coming into this panel discussion today, and those two seem to be the bookmark of what is going on in society. Those who view it as progress and those who view it as fear, and maybe sci-fi is right there in the middle. And productivity and insightful. Thank you for sharing. I think our discussion today is going to speak to most likely every single one of those sentiments. And hopefully by the end of this discussion, leave you with a few more ideas on action items that you can take and spread in your communities and your workplace to help make a difference and raise awareness about these topics. And the fact that productivity is listed so pronounced in this word cloud also helps us to recognize that it can provide either great advances to our ability to be productive or be an exceptional challenge to our ability. So we hope that our panelists will address and speak to each of those items as we move forward. Thank each of you. So now I'm going to turn over and ask our panelists 3 questions. And I want to begin first with the idea of, from the work that you and your organizations do, Rashmi, I want to start with you. Can you tell us a bit about the status and challenges to democratizing artificial intelligence, and also use an example to share that with us? But maybe we should step back and ask you to first provide your definition from your vantage point of what it means to democratize artificial intelligence and why that would be important.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much. And from my viewpoint, democratizing AI would mean equal access to AI for all. And we know one of the challenges that we are facing is how to make AI work for all people, how to empower people, and not just a few handful of people or handful of big tech firms or some countries, but how can we make AI work for all? And in my organization, DESA, we come out with a yearly publication of the World Social Report. And in the forthcoming World Social Report, we are taking a deep dive into how AI is impacting social inclusion. And what we are finding is that AI is, it provides great opportunities, but it is also adding to the existing digital divides. It is adding to the existing inequalities both between the countries and within the countries, and it is creating new forms of inequalities and exclusions. The inequalities created by AI are not just material based, but they are capability based. Just to give you a concrete example, students who do not have devices, they are falling behind, and they lack the opportunities to enter job markets at the right level that they should be entering. And this can create intergenerational learning poverty, I would say. And this is how AI is creating not just inequalities in the present but also in the future. So for AI to really work for all people and to empower all people, it will be extremely important to conduct AI in a way which is more ethical, which is more inclusive, and which works for all people and not just for a few of us. And maybe I will elaborate more going forward. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. You've drawn our attention to, one of the most terrifying possibilities that AI can most likely contribute to the growth of the wealth gap around the world. And so with that introduction, can we turn it over to you, Reverend Hope?
First of all, thank you, Maria. And I would like to give a huge highlight, not only to the United Nations, thankfully, for officially sponsoring this talk, and also to Hope for Africa, which has special consultative status with the United Nations. I see Dr. Joyce Hope on the call and wanted to definitely give a spotlight to the wonderful work for Hope for Africa. I represent several nonprofits, Hope for Africa as the director of youth programs. In addition to that, the Loop Lab, which is focused on technology workforce development. In that work, I'm finding that AI is everywhere now, but it's not empowering everywhere. And that's really the rub. Across the greater Boston, here in Europe, or across Kenya, Benin, Ghana, etc., I see the gap widening, not closing. And so to democratize AI, we have to confront what I say, or at least what I think are 3 structural gaps that show up and above and below the equator. First, there's this digital literacy gap. Young people can open AI tools on their phone, but honestly don't know how to question bias and verify outputs, or understand that their data is being shared and used. Without that foundation, artificial intelligence can become another system that can consume, but not a system that young people can shape. And I think that really the biggest thing is also the infrastructure gap that exists. Aside from digital literacy, we're talking about even when models are free, everything around them is not free. So in Greater Boston, families still share devices. In Benin and Ghana and other places, for example, where Hope for Africa is present, the students that we work with through Hope for Africa face inconsistent connectivity, gaps in Wi-Fi. They can't honestly afford reliable access. So open models can't compensate for unequal infrastructure. And that really needs to be brought home. Thirdly, the dignity gap. And this, as a minister myself, is something that I really hone in on. The gap between those who feel recognized by technology and those who feel erased by it. I'll give you an example that I shared. So a few months ago, I was in a business call, and this was a hybrid business meeting. So it was in person in a conference room, but they also had what's called an OWL device. An OWL device essentially has AI software that can do facial tracking recognition. It can track who's ever in the room talking in the conference room and present them onto the Zoom. So I noticed in this business meeting, however, with the major foundation, all of the darker people, people with darker skin tones, were not getting picked up, including myself. So literally, not just more metaphorically, literally, all of the darker people in that room were being silenced. They were not silenced; they were being unseen. We were being invisible. And so I think for me, standing physically present but invisible is also another metaphor for being invisible in the system. Who's invisible in these systems that are being created in Silicon Valley and beyond, and who's being left out? So for Hope for Africa, for the Loop Lab, for the Hope Group, AI access means very little when the technology doesn't recognize you, it doesn't see you, and doesn't
Mhm.
acknowledge your dignity.
Thank you so much. That's profound. And it reminded me of a Lancet article I was shown yesterday. Someone wrote into the prompt, please draw a picture of, and this is into a chat LLM prompt, please draw the picture of a Black doctor helping poor white children. And the image that came up, and you can look this up in Lancet, was of a white doctor
Right,
helping Black children. So the programming wasn't able to actually
right.
think on its own. It put in what it had been fed in the large machine learning process. And thank you for highlighting those three areas of digital literacy gap, infrastructure gap, and the third, the dignity gap. Profound connection back in the word cloud where we saw the word productivity loom large, and highlighting for us that productivity is only good if it can be equitably distributed, both in the shaping as well as the consuming of these products. Thank you so much. I'm going to actually, following on some of what you described, particularly including resource constrained settings, I'm going to follow up now with Dr. Manzi with a perspective from Partners in Health, as well as Move Up Global and the resource constraint setting view.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madison. And this is really good. And I also want to echo the sentiments that my colleagues shared. It's really an incredible opportunity to talk about these amazing tools. As you know, we are approaching the 2030 deadline. And actually, the fact is, roughly 17 to 18% of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal targets, are on track today. So can you imagine now how we are really lagging behind? And so this conversation really couldn't be even more timely. So I really appreciate the organizers to make this happen. Look, I think on top of what was mentioned, I have to highlight this. One is, you know, when you have a tool that works like AI, but we know that it's gonna need a hardware. So we're gonna need a computer or a cell phone. There's no way around it. So when you know that there's something that works, basically so many countries are actually a step even behind. As we talk about that, I know it was highlighted, Dr. Banda, you said that in high income countries, typically you see 70 to 95% in terms of digital literacy. And when you go to low income countries, that becomes 30%. So people who actually have access to digital literacy. Dr. Madison and I, we went to Rwanda where I have a project, Move Up Global, really helping the young graduates who were not able to make it to college to actually learn computers. And it's fascinating once they learned how to use computers. AI was easy to adopt right away. They actually were the ones to self-teach how to actually use some of these AI tools. So I think it's really important to know that this is an incredible point to highlight because it's going to really push the poor behind and not necessarily adopt the tool that we know work. And number two, the policy gap and the competing priorities. So in many countries, we are still struggling to know, okay, what is the policy around AI? It's actually not even at a country level, it's even at organization level. We see everyone struggling. Should we adopt AI? Should we not? And it's so confusing and challenging. And then when you have no one to help with the direction, that is actually going to delay the adoption of some tools that we know work. And that goes beyond also along with the competing priorities. What do you think when you have to build a maternity room, but also you can benefit from an AI-enabled ultrasound machine? So, and I'm talking about low income countries, low middle income countries, and even in some communities that are really resource constrained. So competing priorities, so they figuring out, should I get this? And then we are now stuck thinking about what's going to be the return on investment when we think about AI. And finally, I want to talk about obviously the cost and power. When you look at the licensing of AI, it is basically mainly centralized in high income countries. So that is a challenge. And what happens is it's the teacher in rural and hard to reach communities of Africa. You find the teacher trying to adopt that tool. You find the nurse trying to adopt that tool. You find the community health worker trying to take that and use that tool, but they are not contributing to that. So basically, the frontline workers being basically the users, not necessarily the co-designer or the beneficiary. So I will stop here, but I see this as really an opportunity. The truth is, without intentional design, AI skills existing, obviously we are seeing more inequalities. That just like Dr. Banda mentioned, we're going to need to really consider these to be able to have a universal access to these tools that we know work.
Profound. Thank you so much, Dr. Manzi. And as you reminded me of your work in Move Up Global in rural Rwanda outside of Kigali, I remember speaking with the Nigerian physician saying that to improve the application of the benefit of the positive attributes of AI in medicine and in rural areas, we should be using these highly curated databases, highly curated machine learning programs, such as open evidence. I think I gave it as an example. And I had no idea that open evidence wasn't available free and around the world. And so, to your point, and to the point of productivity, we need to make sure that all of these more validated AI tools are equitably accessed around the world, especially pushing it out to the poor. And then going back to Dr. Banga's point, and as well, Reverend Hope's, it's got to be shaping it as well as using it. So learned so much from working with you, and it's exciting to think about these topics now, which brings me over to our wonderful colleague as well, Dr. Ghosh. Dia, tell us a bit about how this question of the status and challenges of democratizing AI is situated within your transgenerational work at the grassroots level and beyond.
Thank you for that, Dr. Madison, and a big thanks and much appreciation to the United Nations, the Hope Group, and all of the organizers and panelists on this call, and everyone here who decided to attend this session, because I truly think we are at a pivotal moment in history where every voice needs to be part of this conversation, and our grassroots efforts at Joint Family are directly motivated by the widening digital gaps across generations, across community lines that we're seeing play out globally and across the country, many of which were surfaced by some of the previous panelists. Sort of taking a step back from where we stand, if you look at the issue across states and nationally, according to, I think it was the Pew Research Center's report from last year, 62% of adults under 30 say that they've heard a lot about AI and they're already using these tools. Now, if you look at the other side of the age spectrum, for adults 65 and older, that number drops to 32%. And this divide is not just an issue of age, but access is heavily tilted towards people who are already in workforce, who are highly educated, and who are living in urban areas. And all of this conversation about AI adoption and access is also tightly coupled with income and connectivity. I was, in fact, at the Net Inclusion Conference in Chicago last week, where practitioners, educators, policymakers across state expressed deep concerns about federal funding cuts to broadband and to digital inclusion programs, and how that is threatening to make this divide even worse. And it's just hard to imagine AI equity if you don't have that funding support and even reliable connectivity. All of this is reflected in our work with community organizations, even across Massachusetts, in sessions with older and younger adults from low-income communities. We're seeing a similar lack of exposure that's often, again, linked with confusion, fear, and concern about this technology. And even in a state like Massachusetts, which otherwise, is known for its innovation and academic excellence, we were at a session with local tenant organizations in Western Massachusetts, and we asked a simple question to the audience about how many of them had heard about ChatGPT or used it. This is a room of 50. 5 people raised their hands. 3 of them were myself, my team member, and the AV guy. And that is the kind of disparity that we're talking about here, where some of these very communities are also the ones at risk of being adversely impacted by the societal ramifications of AI. And really, our efforts are motivated by this urgency, gap, and need that's driving a lot of our work in bridging generational, digital, and disciplinary divides. And what we're trying to do through our programming is to democratize this process of providing access by creating inclusive learning spaces, by making room for inquiry and deliberation. All of our workshops center on real-world issues, whether it's the impact of AI in our daily lives, on education, work, creativity, climate, healthcare, relationships. It's the full gamut of sectors that AI is influencing and reshaping. And finally, we hope to democratize AI by centering our programming on ethics, safety, and responsible use, because access alone does not necessarily build the trust, the connection, and the long-term resilience that really will be needed for us as a society to cope, adapt to this rapidly evolving technology. So with that, I'll give it back.
That's exceptional. And thank you so much, Dia. I want to drill in a little bit because I've had the honor of being in some of your workshops, including at a high school, as well as with elderly populations. And I'm smiling because I'm of the age of those in your audience. But what I found particularly interesting as we're talking about expanding access was the pushback in the high school. Can you share a little bit what you're comfortable with on the findings and the views from social workers and students' use and the school's approach to AI?
Sure. I mean, without naming names and without pointing fingers, because I do think this is not a one-off
Mm-mm.
scenario. This is playing out across the country where educators, policymakers, leaders are really grappling with the momentum and pace at which this technology is accelerating, the lack of guardrails, and just the inertia around regulatory frameworks. And to Maria's point, our workshop at that event was for professional development with mental health counselors, special educators, and teachers at a local high school. And the topic itself centered around youth and mental health. So a conversation that is quite sensitive and one that is both urgent but a difficult one to navigate. And what we learned is that there was a lot of concern amongst educators about the integration of AI tools in schools and classrooms without the uh, deliberation that is required for what happens if something goes awry, without the policy in place for how do we navigate this, again, rapidly shifting space of AI potentially being a powerful, empowering tool in the context of education, again, democratizing access there. And yet at the same time, the biases, the hallucination, the concerns around dependency and reliance, the concerns about erosion of trust and critical thinking, and how do we shape course curricula and policy frameworks, even at a local level, was the missing gap that we were surprised, but I wouldn't say necessarily surprised because we've come across this, but it's more in terms of perhaps alarmed that there isn't more being done prior to integration of these tools.
Thank you so much. Developing the guardrails first and an inclusive development of the guardrails. Nothing about us without us approach. And that really draws me back to, I'm going to go in reverse order perhaps, but Dr. Manzi, when we think about who's benefiting and who's at risk, well, we could all benefit if we were all at the table, right? As opposed to being on the table. If we were all at the table helping to design the guardrails as well as the systems. And it's just reminds me of some of the populations who helped to test ChatGPT before it was released, for example. So, our second question really does say who's benefiting and who is at risk. Do you want to speak a little bit about that risk element of rolling out these extremely potent tools?
Absolutely. And thank you again. This is a great question. I guess uh it's who's benefiting is obviously it's obvious and who can benefit? I think that's actually pretty the most important question. Who's benefiting is that with that connectivity, the one who speaks English, who because most of the tools are in English, the one who has the device needed to be able to upload and download. But who can benefit from this is actually um, that nurse who has 50 patients waiting right in the front and has no way to actually screen those. That teacher has a 50-page document and he can't translate those in English because he speaks 4 or 5 languages to get to English, right? So, and there's a tool like AI-enabled tools that can do that within 1 second. I'm gonna give you an example here. We at Partners in Health, we are really challenging the status quo. I think that's what we all should really be doing. Saying that a nurse in rural Lesotho can benefit from using an AI-enabled ultrasound,
Mhm.
where doctors and nurses struggle to diagnose tuberculosis. A patient would have to go back and forth for 2 weeks. And now, bringing these tools, it's just taking 5 minutes to get that diagnosis, right? Can you imagine being a teacher in rural sub-Saharan Africa, where you have no idea how to grade 70 kids in a classroom? And now you have AI-enabled tool that can grade all of them within just 1 minute. They are going home to stay with their families and they can sleep. They can plan for the next activity for the students. Those are those who actually could benefit from AI enabled tools. They are at risk, those with low means, those who are in hard to reach communities with no electricity, with no internet, with no devices. I think they can benefit those who are trying to really do their best to actually even make decisions. I think we often forget the decision makers. Imagine being a mayor or administrator dealing with all these decisions and you're still using a typing, machine, or maybe an old computer with the old operating system. So everyone can benefit to this. And I'm really excited. And I think I am going back to Dr. Banga, what she said, especially with investing in the children and the next generation. I think that we got to invest in the next generation of leaders through formal education. AI should be embedded in pre-service education, in secondary education, in elementary education. I think even those who missed that chance, that window, we should also think about some ad hoc trainings so AI literacy is everywhere and to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I imagine that bundled with that training is also raising awareness around the risks associated with it in order for us all to help mitigate that risk. So Reverend Hope, do you want to speak a little bit from your perspective on the benefits and the risks and who's harmed or benefiting?
Absolutely. And I agree with everything Dr. Manzi communicated. So, Maria, for me, one of the biggest traits of AI is that it's a force multiplier. It will multiply the opportunities that are already there for people that have opportunities through advantages that they have, accumulation of advantages in life. But it also can multiply the disparities that exist. And we referred to that a little bit earlier in the conversation. And that is, I think, of more of a concern for us, but also more of a focus area in terms of the underestimated, I don't say underrepresented, but underestimated populations that unfortunately suffer at the hands of not being able to take full advantage of the opportunities of these tools. In the United States, that tends to be immigrants, people of color, Black and brown folks. As we know, and there's data to support, they are largely, unfortunately, on the bad side of algorithmic bias. When we talk about facial tracking recognition, surveillance, and other means in terms of using AI. But also when we're thinking about just globally, just the lack of access, because we're seeing more and more people that are able to take advantage of these tools are doing so to help and expand their businesses. They're doing so to help and expand their economic opportunities and productivity and also creativity. And so to me, it not just becomes a technical challenge, it's a great moral challenge of the 21st century that we come together and to do something about this. With that being said, I'll share an example. At the Loop Lab, we train young people to get into the audio video industry. And one of our participants, he was with his classmates and he was working on a video project. And long story short, we teach them how to use AI for certain things. And they were struggling with trying to draft a new scene with a script because they were using Claude AI, right, which is one of the large language models. And for whatever reason, they hit a wall. And I'll never forget what they said. It was essentially they were trying for the video was really focused on a very specific subset of urban Black folks in a community, and this person said that this AI doesn't understand. It doesn't get the language that I'm trying to communicate. Not linguistically, but culturally and socially. And I think that to me demonstrated the fact is you'll have more and more things like that in these large language models when certain people are left out of the global development systems. right? And how these technologies are being built and created. And the more and more that we see that, you're going to have more and more, unfortunately, folks that are left out.
Mm, profound. Thank you so much. I want to turn to you now, Dr. Banga, for the same question of helping us to see with a little more granularity from your perspective, who are the beneficiaries versus those who are at greatest risk with this new AI world.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with what Reverend Hope and Dr. Manzi said about those who are using AI tools. But I want to go beyond the use of AI tools. I think the beneficiaries are those who are creating these AI tools. We are all generating data, but those who know how to store data, how to get data intelligence and process data, how to use this data intelligence in AI algorithms, those are the ones who are really the main beneficiaries of this AI revolution. And this is leading to more and more concentration of wealth in the hands of very few. So if you look at the top 1%, we find that the global wealth, the share of top 1% in global wealth increased by 68% to 76% in the past 5 years. So 1% are really having 76% of the global wealth. So that is the kind of concentration of wealth that AI is, and digital technologies are creating. So they are really benefiting. And those who are being excluded from the algorithms, whether it is financial exclusion, health exclusion, exclusions based on gender, disability, descent, whatever the reason, those who are being excluded today, they will lead to algorithm biases, which will lead to future exclusions. So I think they are at the risk, they're most at the risk of this AI revolution. And I think the beneficiaries are very few in terms of gaining from creating AI tools. But those who are using AI tools, they also benefit to some extent. But those who are excluded, their costs are much higher than the gains of few creators of AI.
Thank you. So in that sense, would you argue that it is important for everybody, every individual around the world to be exposed, if not participate in creating a deeper connection to AI?
I think AI literacy is very important. Taking AI to education sector to increase the employability of education is very important, because this is how everyone will learn how to benefit or use AI tools, but not just limit themselves to use of AI tools, but also how to create AI tools in future. So being educated on AI techniques right from the beginning, right from the school, can increase the aptitude of the students on learning quickly and adapting and then innovating and inventing. So that is where we need to go with AI.
Thank you so much. So if we take everything everyone has said and the words that were put in the word cloud and bring it to its illogical conclusion, we might ask ourselves, if we're heading down this AI roller coaster, well, what does it mean to be human? What is it we want to make sure we retain? Especially since we're saying no one should be left out of this fast-moving train. Well, what does it mean to be human? What should we retain? I know it's an impossible question, because I know that neuroscientists and philosophers are still trying to answer the question of what is consciousness. There is no universal answer to what it means to be human necessarily, and its relationship to this idea of consciousness. But we're going to ask anyway, and maybe we'll start with the spiritual answer, maybe an insight from a religious perspective on what does it mean to be human, and will we be able to retain that in the face of this AI evolution or revolution?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Maria. I think that there's a lack of humility in terms of When we talk about AI and AGI, this concept that we even understand what our intelligence is, right? When we talk about augmented intelligence, artificial intelligence, there's not really a clear defined science-supported background of an understanding of what intelligence truly is. And I bring that up because we're seeing, at least from my perspective, I think this acceleration of artificial intelligence is doing a couple of things. One is it's challenging us in the deepest moral way possible. What, as human beings, are we willing to outsource, right? In terms of outsourcing our relationships in exchange for productivity or higher efficiency. Even and not just relationships in terms of professional. Now you're having more and more people engaged in romantic and deep, well, at least for them, deep conversation and relationships with chatbots. People are seeking therapy in chatbots. And as a minister, we were even seeing people seeking spiritual guidance from chatbots. With that being said, there are deep moral implications to that because, again, there's a reason why therapists study and hone in into what they do and they're licensed. Same thing with pastors and ministers and imams. These are individuals that have dedicated their lives with not just study of knowledge, but also lived experience. And that's just something that no language model now has. The second thing that I'll share that is also a challenge, it's challenged notions around creativity. We're seeing more on the Loop Lab side in media, more and more AI generated content and people having a difficulty discerning what's real and what's not. And that has become a very big concern, in terms of politics. And we're talking about democratizing AI. With the flip side of that, AI has become, in some cases, a threat to democracy. And if we're not careful, that is absolutely a challenge to human civilization as we know it. Um, I would say the last challenge that for me is also prominent is how do we define as human beings dignity? I shared earlier that example of me in the business meeting, and I remember it clearly because I felt invisible. Being a black man already in the United States in a business meeting, presenting my best self in either way, I'm still invisible, right? And so I think that the thing that we have to really wrestle with is what is human dignity, and is that worth more than just being more efficient, right? There's the trade-off. And I argue human dignity is at the highest levels. Empathy is at the highest levels. AI cannot be empathetic. It cannot have empathy. And so for me, the technology shouldn't come first. It should be human-centered. If anything, it should help multiply empathy. It should help multiply some of these good attributes and more divine attributes that we should be aspiring to as human beings.
Absolutely wonderful. Others who would like to weigh in on that? I can cold call.
Just one point over here. I think I totally agree with what has been said, but here also there is a difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. I think AI lacks wisdom, and that is what human beings has. If you ask AI, should wealth be taxed? It will give you the narratives why it should be taxed and why it should not be taxed. But if you ask a policymaker, should wealth be taxed? He will look at the inequality in his country. He will look at his political power to make a change and then give an answer to that. And wisdom is what is missing or lacking in AI.
That's so wonderful. As we're talking about the need to move AI literacy and education all the way beginning in kindergarten, we're also saying maybe the first platform should be training on a moral compass, training on ethics, training on empathy and wisdom, and that those should be the root of where we head with prioritizing our educational systems, and that then responsible AI and ethical AI can build from that strong spine if we build it in our youth from the start. So I'm going to ask if Dr. Ghosh or Dr. Manzi want to add to this.
I'm happy to comment. Most of my reflections mirror those that have been raised by Chris and Dr. Banga already. I do think that for the first time in human history, we are facing a very persuasive and convincing entity that is a simulacra. It speaks like us. It can create images, music, content, hold a conversation that feels often very personal. As Reverend Hope referenced, it can even mimic empathy that Dr. Sherry Turkle at MIT has labeled pretend empathy, because clearly these systems don't have an understanding of the real world like we do. And yet these systems have access to vast amounts of data. They can detect patterns faster than we can. They can predict, calculate, even optimize at a scale that no individual human ever could. And in some cases, we're seeing how the ramifications of these abilities in that some AI systems can already surpass human capabilities. Like, I think last year, one of the models won the gold at a math Olympiad. And so I do think it is starting to challenge a lot of things that we take granted about ourselves, about our capabilities, about our societies, how we learn, how do we preserve critical thinking in this digital age, how we work when something like vibe coding can rapidly generate software. How do we seek help when you have AI therapists and AI counselors showing up in place of real human expertise? How we connect, and this is something that we deeply care about at Joint Family, the connection across generations, the connection across expertise and disciplines, the connection across communities. Because now if you have an entity where you need very little effort on your part, where it validates things that you're saying, it mostly agrees with your ideas and your perspectives. What happens when there is a frictionless alternative to the messiness of human relationships? So, yeah, so I think all of this is really going to be packaged into some difficult questions that we will have to grapple around trust, around accountability, around relationship building. And at Joint Family, a lot of our efforts are to surface these issues through interactive sessions, through community conversations, showcasing case studies and asking people, what would you do if this happened to you? How are we preparing as a community to brace for the societal shifts and impacts? And I do think there's a lot of fundamental investigation and inquiry that will revolve around what differentiates humans from machine-generated content, where we can exercise our agency, as Dr. Banga mentioned. What do we value in terms of care, in terms of judgment, in terms of wisdom, which in my mind, I still associate more with humans, but perhaps that will change down the road. So I do think this is a moment for reflection, inquiry, and working hard to figure out what we care about collectively.
Oh, so beautifully said. I have to confess that this morning I was listening to a talk with two neuroscientists describing what differentiates AI from humans. And at the core of it, they both agreed it was our messiness. It was, you can't program, the beauty that comes from accidents necessarily, and that we are unpredictable. And that means you couldn't program probabilities to get to our unpredictability. And computers are all about probability models. So you beautifully described that messiness. Dr. Manzi, would you like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you, 20 years ago, I joined the Partners in Health, and right after joining Partners in Health, Paul Farmer, our late Paul Farmer, who passed away recently, the co-founder of Partners in Health, he came over to see me and say, the model that we use is known as accompaniment. And accompaniment is a model practice at Partners in Health, and it refers to the practice of being present and supportive with patients throughout their lives, their illness journey. And it says that it emphasizes the moral responsibility of a caregiver to provide an ongoing care and support, ensuring that patients receive empathy and compassion throughout their treatment.
Mm.
This is more of accompaniment, but what is actually really unique about human being? Let's even say AI versus a human accompaniment. What is actually more important to notice is the relationship and the human soul. The connection that we have as a human is beyond even the speech or the outputs from the prompt that we input, right? It is that human connection that we have is spiritual. And AI doesn't have that. And I think it's really important to see AI as a helper. If I was to spend 30 minutes struggling to triage patients, if I was a teacher struggling to grade 70 kids in a classroom, then you only process that for 5 minutes, then all you gave me is a time to be a good accompanitor. You give me a chance to spend more time with the patient. You give me more time to spend more time with the family. So I think nothing gonna replace that human nature. I think he talked about the wisdom. Yes, AI doesn't have that wisdom. It's very intelligent, but no wisdom. But AI is not an accompanitor. A true accompanitor is bi-directional. Accompaniment is direct bi-directional. I feel better when when I talked with Dr. Madison. We designed a program we called TS Square, twinning to scale and close digital divide, and that's in Rwanda. That's a project I have with Move Up Global in Rwanda. We actually invited an American student to be twinned with a Rwandan student and to work on computer literacy for the young people in rural Rwanda. So what happened is I asked the twin who is based in Rwanda and said, "You have been twinned to an American. What do you think was the major change or impact of this?" Uh, Although the twin learned so much from the American twin, although the American learned so much for the Rwandan counterpart, what they learned, what was the most important was the connection.
Mm.
And the feeling that an American faces the same challenges and the Rwandan. So that was the most impactful. I was expecting something different. Of course, they made an impact, right? But what is the most important, that human connection, knowing that I am being accompanied by a human being, that gives me a unique opportunity. And and it feels different. Anyway, we can obviously spend hours and hours. It's a philosophical question, but to really sum it up, I see this as a human-centered AI as the best approach. It gives us more time to do what matters most. I think that's to me, and I can see, and again, as we continue the conversation, I also see this is an urgent conversation, but also action required. There's a huge cost of inaction because if we know the tool works, I think it's unethical to not bring that tool in the hands of people so we can spend more time with the families and patients and the students. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for lifting up that idea of moral responsibility and accompaniment. Dr. Tefera and I are taking a course at Stanford for user interface and user experience. And at Stanford, they're really trying to emphasize that this is human driven and that humans need to have that moral compass at the center of it. And in fact, I think that lecturer described that before there was AI, at the beginning of AI, there was IA, intelligence augmentation, that they were trying to come up with a neural network approach to programming computers that was to augment human intelligence, not replace it. So at the center of that is everything you all have just described. And so now what we'd like to do is turn over to one or two of the questions that we received from audience members in advance. And the first one that was randomly selected from those that were received earlier is, and I'll quote, "We often hear about human-centered AI, but what does it look like when humans are not leading in the loop?" And we've touched on this a little bit, but please feel free to add a little bit more about what it looks like when humans aren't leading in the loop. We're excited about this era. We think it should be equitably distributed throughout the world, but what does it look like when humans aren't leading in the loop? And I'm going to start in random order this time. And maybe Dr. Ghosh, would you like to start? And then we'll go over to Dr. Banga.
Sure, I can give a couple of examples and insights from our community conversation. So, for example, the particular session that Maria alluded to earlier, when humans are not included in the loop, you get a climate of confusion, fear, and concern. If teachers could be involved in co-designing the AI tools for education, if they could be involved in the policy frameworks that could influence how AI is being leveraged and deployed in school systems, that is a sensible approach. But often, I think we tend to rush. We tend to adopt without necessarily recognizing the risks and what's at stake. Another example is in the case of this is something that I find so disconcerting and hard to wrap my mind around, which is the release of software that can be used to create realistic synthetic content. Because now we are seeing non-consensual, explicit images of young girls and minors surface, some of our most vulnerable groups. And who or what gave permission to these companies to release this sort of software without any regulation, accountability, or guardrails? We have regulations for just about every other industry. And Dr. Madison and I have discussed this because we both have backgrounds in the healthcare space. We see this in the context of aviation, seat belts, food industry, even getting out a drug, a psychiatric drug, you needs to go through several hoops. And yet, when it comes to some of these platforms that can be used now to generate fake information, that can be used to cyberbully and also engage young adults who are still socially, emotionally not ready to have conversations about relationship, to engage them in intimate conversations, where is that protection and where are the safety nets there? So that's, I think, what happens when you don't have co-design, when you don't have communities involved in building out the technology.
That harm is growing, and the outcry for increased regulation, particularly to protect minors, and the kinds of regulations and restrictions we're seeing in different regions of the world because of the risks and harms that have resulted. Profound. I'm going to ask if Dr. or Reverend Hope, would you like to go next?
I would just echo Dia's comments. Again, like I shared earlier, AI is a force multiplier. And so when the human is not in the loop, as the phrase goes, you're going to see more and more things out of the loop. All pun intended. Shout out to the Loop Lab. The big thing with that is really focusing on the fact that the technology is not at a place where you can afford having human oversight.
Mm.
That's just the reality. As we know, as it is now, generative AI hallucinates, it can make mistakes. And when you're unfortunately creating structures and underpinning within those structures, and you're designing this technology to underpin everything from how insurance claims and insurance premiums are rated for individuals, how housing, right? And we're talking about housing and how housing is distributed to individuals in housing lotteries, all the way down to people now using AI for relationships. The implications are wide and vast and very dangerous. And so, this conversation is really critical because we're at a time where we're seeing more and more corporations saying we're going to lay off thousands of people because guess what? We can automate their jobs and use AI to do it. The reality of that, though, is that a lot of this software, one, is not at a place where it can completely replace human decision making.
Mm.
And so to do that is really a fallacy and it's hubris.
Thank you so much. Dr. Banga, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, just to add to the points that are already there on the table, one danger which is there is when your AI agent is being trained by another AI. This could lead to some collusions, and many of the policies and regulations are then bypassed. For example, the competition policy. You're not there. There is a lot of collusion done by AI softwares among themselves to bring down the prices or whatever. No single human being can be held accountable at that point of time. And I think this is also what Dia was saying, that accountability becomes very challenging once the human beings are not in the loop. And it is extremely important that human beings are held accountable for the AI algorithms they are creating. They cannot pass their responsibility to another AI agent or to other AI which has trained the agent. They should not be able to pass that responsibility. So this really brings me back to the importance of AI regulations, AI ethics, and what you mentioned right in the beginning, the principles, the UNESCO principles on AI, which becomes so important when human beings are not in the loop.
Wonderful. Do you want to add, Dr. Manzi?
I really highlight that was that what everyone just mentioned. I think the simple answer is it's a disaster when it's not human centered. It's a disaster. Honestly, and again, we should also be clear at what do we mean with even involvement of the human. I think we put it there that it's from the design. So they have to be that design,
Mm.
even the recruitment of the validation, and who is involved, because we see many tools where, because they were tested in one group of people, then there are some issues, even generalizing whatever the AI tool can do, simply because there was not an equity in the participation and actually the validation process. So it's a disaster when it's not human-centered, and it becomes just business as usual for that one who want to be to actually record the next billion, not necessarily the one who want to use it. So I think that I think it's really important to yes set the policy and regulations necessary to make that happen. But I think back to moral responsibility. All of us have that moral responsibility to ensure that it is human centered. I give an example also when it comes to our transition. For people to understand what AI is able to do, it got to be human-centered. So the human being understand exactly the capacity, capability of AI. So we think about how we're gonna be our role as users and human being. I remember in one of the countries 20 years ago, in one of the countries we introduced electronic medical record system and point of care. It's point of care. So then we ask the doctors, now it's time to start typing instead of using in the booklets that each patient would bring. You're going to be using computers and type.
Mm.
And I remember a moment when that was decided. One doctor submitted a resignation for retirement. He was forced to retire because he had never used a computer before. He said, how am I going to actually get into this? This is not for me.
Mm.
So, what if we had actually immersed him and trained him and ensured that we go slowly and he actually was comfortable. Now we see one of the best doctors saying, I can't take this. This is beyond my grade. So he was forced to retire. So
Mm.
I think it's even with the benefit of actually making it human centered is 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 beyond the representation. It's about how do we even prepare ourselves to transition
Mm-hmm.
and to even know, okay, what else can I do? That is more meaningful as we adopt these new tools. So I think we have a lot to do to be the catalysts of these adoption.
Beautifully said. And with the 10 minutes remaining, we want to collect all of your ideas on actions that our audience can take with them and consider doing both professionally and personally in their communities and in their organizations that can help close the inequity on AI literacy. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Banga. Or no, you know what? Let's end with Dr. Banga, and we'll start with Reverend Hope.
Oh, thank you. I'll start with scripture. Our people perish for lack of knowledge. And so for me, dignity comes from design. And in the case of ethical AI, it becomes imperative that we as a society and as all of you that are watching this, if you invest and prioritize ethical AI training in whatever realm of what it is that you do, if you're an educator, really focus in on ethical AI. If you are in civic work and you're doing work for public agencies. Again, invest in your knowledge in terms of ethical AI training. At the Hope Group, that's our focus. We're even offering cohorts. And so I don't call them programs. It's really more important. It's about foundations. How can we establish a strong foundation for our citizens of the world to really have access so they can accelerate and multiply in a positive way their lives, but also be involved and included in what has been communicated as the digital beloved community, meaning that it's part of a broader vision that we can really achieve what Dr. Martin Luther King's dream entailed, which was a beloved community, but one for the digital realm in terms of the digital economy, as well as the digital world. And so I think for me is really advancing and having us prioritize ethical AI education on every level of society.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ghosh?
Yeah, beautifully said, Chris. And I think this question often for me turns a little bit more philosophical and a little bit spiritual as well, because fundamentally, I think it's about care. But if you just stop for a moment and consider a world where AI does indeed automate a lot of tasks that we associate with being human, what do you really care about at that point? For some, that might be creativity. For some, that might be leisure. For me personally, and I know this is something that other members in joint family also deeply think about, which is about human presence, belonging, care, community, and connection. And so, in my mind, the question that arises with the call to action is how do we move the needle from current narratives that are often defined by success and smartness and achievements to a economy and a culture of kindness, care, and wisdom? As a scientist and technologist, how do we shift this obsession with innovation and progress and profitability towards co-design, as mentioned by many of you here today, that's grounded in ethics and guardrails and accountability? Again, given my background, I recognize the potential and promise of AI. We've seen the wonders that are possible with programs like AlphaFold. There are alternative pathways and approaches to leveraging this tool in a meaningful way. So I do think this is an acronym which I know Maria and Chris have heard me promote before. But at Joint Family, we use an acronym that we take pride in, where pride stands for P for pausing, R for reflecting, I for inquiry and informing ourselves, D for deliberating and discussing with those around us, and E for engaging critically with responsibility, with openness, and with a mindset around ethics. So while the current moment can feel very overwhelming for many of us, it can feel despairing, confusing, alarming. I do believe that each of us has agency, whether individually or collectively, in influencing how AI shows up in our workplace, in our schools, in our communities, in our homes, and in our policy making. And so we need to be a participant in the development of this technology. And that's part of what motivates our grassroots, bottom-up emphasis on bringing people together across generations, across disciplines, across levels of familiarity. It starts with a simple conversation.
So beautifully said. And I'm just going to add that what you and I both try to do is to provide all of that through free workshops, because we also believe that this information is so important. We need to push it out there as quickly as we can and for free, or as close to free as possible. And with that, I'm going to turn to Dr. Manzi, and then we're going to ask Dr. Banga to close our session with the view from the UN's report on call to action. Dr. Manzi?
I gotta probably expand on what you just said. Really, really addressing the root causes. Why don't we see this? If we know this works, why is it not getting where it should be? I think that, the story of John, a young graduate who was desperate. He completed his education, but no job in the community. He could not do anything. And with just a 3-week training, which addressed obviously, the Microsoft and then, get into AI. Right after that, he was called by the town to serve as one of their employees and now taking care of the entire family. I think that there is a lot we can get. We have an opportunity to really bridge the gap and the digital divide, but also we have a AI to accelerate the progress. This will happen only if we are kind enough to offer the skill set needed. This will happen if we invest in the basic resources we highlighted, the software, hardware needed, and basic infrastructure. This will only happen, if we invested in policy shifts, like from the national to, community level, the policies regulating the use, but also providing opportunities to those in need. And I think this is what I have to highlight, and then over to you, Dr. Banga.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manzi. Dr. Banga?
Thank you. I totally agree with what Dr. Manzi said. I think we have talked about challenges of AI, but there are also many opportunities. In our forthcoming frontier technology issue of UN DESA, we have estimated that youth contribution to GDP in some countries can increase to something like 9 to 10% if they are given the AI skills. If the AI skill gap is really targeted, there can be huge benefits. And we know youth unemployment is rising in many countries, in many continents, especially Africa. So this can provide a lot of opportunities for the youth. But a call for action would be really to take AI education as a priority, increase AI literacy, take AI to schools. Children are very adaptable to new technologies, they will learn very fast. And the gap which is there between and within countries, that can be filled only if AI is taken down to the school level. And many countries, have started doing that at the secondary level, and some countries also at the primary level. So I think this is what we should really aim at. Teach everyone so that everyone has equal access to AI. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much to this panel. I'm going to end also by thanking the audience and everyone for joining us. The UN report has 11 also very specific actions that should and can be taken that are really subsequent to a lot of what you've heard in today's discussion. But I will add that they highlight the need for ethical governance and stewardship. So education, access, and governance, and fairness and transparency are all what is going to help move equitable, responsible AI use and distribution around the world. And that requires creating and demanding at organizations and leadership create those guardrails, as well as the ethics boards, AI ethics committees, advisory committees that represent the population served by AI to help design it, as well as equitably distribute its best attributes while also reducing the damaging negative impacts that we get from AI that has not included us or the general population in its development. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to all our panelists and to each of you that have joined this discussion. Please keep the conversation going, create a conversation group, share ideas, share resources, and let's touch everyone in the world with this topic and spread the knowledge. Thank you again, and have a good week.
Thank you.